So it's great to be here. I've never been here before. I'm originally from New York City, but I have to say that I don't think I've ever, shockingly, I don't think I've ever been to Greenwich. And it's nice to see, you guys, the synagogue did a trip to Krakow, to Poland in 2014, in June 2014. So I've been waiting, and it's very nice to be able to come back and be able to return the favor and talk a little bit about what's going on today in Poland. And hopefully we'll have some time, if I don't just blab on and on, we'll have some time for questions. So we're a people of stories. And I think sometimes the best way to illustrate something which I think is really miraculous that's going on is with a couple stories. So I'm going to start with that. A few months ago, a young woman walked into the JCC looking a little nervous. She asked to speak to a rabbi. There was no rabbi around. I was the closest thing. My father would have been very happy if I was the rabbi, but unfortunately, only the director of the JCC. But the staff at the JCC is very well trained, especially the volunteers in the reception. We have a lot of volunteers working in the JCC, that if somebody comes in this situation, to automatically come and get me. So I brought this young woman up to my office. Her name was Maria, and Maria was assured by me that she was in the right place and speaking to the right person. And I said, please tell me what's going on. And she calmed down a little bit and said that a week before, she had been called by her grandmother, who also lived in Krakow, and told her to come over to her house right away. Gotta come over. So Maria goes over to her grandmother's house. Her grandmother sits her down and said, listen, I have to tell you something that I've never told anyone before. Okay. She begins to tell her the story that she's Jewish, and that she was a little girl in the ghetto during the war. And one night, her parents brought her to the edge of the ghetto, to the wall, passed her on to somebody who was waiting there for her, who eventually brought her over to a couple who raised her as their own daughter. And the last thing she remembered her mother saying to her, as her mother said goodbye to her, was, never tell anyone that you're Jewish. And that was the final goodbye with her parents. Her parents were murdered not long after. And Maria's grandmother kept her promise. She got married, she had a career, had a family, children, grandchildren, and until that day, a week or so before, she had never told anyone. She'd kept her promise and never told anyone that she was Jewish. And now she told Maria, you're Jewish, go find out what that means. And Maria luckily found her way into the right place. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, what do I say to her? And this is what we do. We're finding people who are lost, Jews who are finding out about their identity that grew up without knowing about it. They're coming into the JCC. That's a big part of what we do. But luckily, I think from my heart, not all the stories are as dramatic as this one. So I thought what to say to her, understanding it was important, my reaction to her, and she's sort of waiting for me to say something. And I said, you've come to the right place. There are so many others like you here. And this was the right thing to tell her. She smiled, and she said, well, what should I do? I said, well, why don't you come for Shabbat dinner next week? She said, great. She came for Shabbat dinner. She made some friends. She met other people in a similar situation, and started to get involved and started to reclaim her Jewish identity, something that was taken away from her by sort of the cruel hand of history. She's since then been on Birthright, Taglit, and is sort of reintegrated back into the Jewish world. That's one of the more dramatic stories that I've heard, but there are really many, many. Rabbi Shudrik, who's the chief rabbi of Poland, he has a story, and I never tell his story, but I tell about his story because only he tells it really the right way, about somebody, a couple that were skinheads, and they also accidentally found out that they were Jewish. So there's really something quite remarkable going on. Another very, I think, interesting story, which is a little lighter than the Maria story, is a woman named Marziana. Marziana is 25 years old now. She is running our Hillel. We just opened Hillel in Krakow, connected to the JCC. We have a growing student population. And Marziana also grew up without knowing she was Jewish. What's Marziana's story? Marziana was about 15. She was sitting at home one day, and she decided, sitting around on the computer, she decided to Google her name, which some of us do. Some of us do it maybe a little too often. But Marziana Googled her own name, and she saw that the family, a couple of generations back, had changed the name. And she said, oh, okay, that's odd. She calls into her mom, who's in the other room in the apartment, and goes, Ma, what's going on? I see that, that the family changed their name. What are we, German? Her mom, without missing a beat, goes, no, we're Jewish. What, I never told you? Said, no, Ma, you never mentioned that one to me. So this is the story of Krakow today. This is what's going on today in Poland, that these young people are finding out that they're Jewish. And I think what's really even more remarkable than finding out, although the finding out aspect is pretty fascinating, is that they're acting upon it. It's not enough to find out. And if you think about, I don't know, if I were 19 years old today and in Paris and I found out that I had a Jewish grandparent, I don't know that I'd be knocking the doors down to go walk into a Jewish building in the middle of Paris, because it's very dependent on what the environment is. So to me, what's the miracle of Krakow is that people are finding out in an environment that's conducive to being Jewish. So when we talk about Poland, I think as much as many of us have thought about Poland, unless we have sort of a very direct family history and connection and been there. But I think, as a kid growing up in Forest Hills, when I thought about Poland, it was in the context of the Holocaust. So how do we get from this point of thinking about Poland in the context of the Holocaust to 2018 of young people finding out they're Jewish and choosing to get involved? Who are these young people, and how did we get to this point in 2018, which is a very strange point to be at? So maybe just a little quick through. We'll go through 1,000 years of history very, very quickly. Don't worry, I'm not a historian, and I wouldn't want to hear a whole lecture about it. Certainly from me, but it's important to understand sort of how we got to this point. So Poland, I don't think I need to tell you guys, was a very Jewish place for a very long time. Right? There's 1,000 years of Jewish history in Poland. Good times, bad times, good times, bad times, and then the worst time. And usually with the worst time, that's the end of our thinking about Poland. But that's not exactly the case. But 1939, if we get to that point and take a look at 1939, right on the eve of World War II, the German invasion in September, there were 3.5 million Jews living in Poland, 10% of the population. The United States today, do you know what percent the United States is? 2, 1.5, right? Something very, very much less. So a city like Warsaw was 1/3 Jewish. Krakow was 1/4 Jewish. Cities in the east like Lublin, Białystok, over 50% Jewish. More Jewish than any place in the world today is outside of Israel. 60% of the lawyers in pre-war Poland, 1939, were Jewish. 40% of the doctors. Right? You had 30 daily Yiddish newspapers. So for us even to understand, to start to comprehend the magnitude of the Holocaust, we need to understand what was there before to understand what was lost. Now the Holocaust happened in Poland primarily. Why? Because this is where the Jews were. But if we take a step back and we say this is where the Holocaust happened, why were the Jews there? The Jews were there because they were welcome in Poland when they were kicked out of other countries in Europe. So not to say that all of history was wonderful and pre-war in the 18th century and 19th, 17th was all wonderful for the Jews of Poland. Absolutely not. Poland, again, ups and downs, ups and downs. This king likes the Jews, the next king doesn't like the Jews, it's convenient for this king, this one says no, whatever, up and down, up and down. 1939, it all falls off a cliff, and by the end of World War II, over 90% of the 3.5 million Jews are murdered. Almost all of the Jews are killed, and in our narrative, when we think about that, we understand there were survivors. But we think about the survivors having left. We know survivors came to the US, they came to all of our communities, went to South America, they went to Sweden, they went wherever they could. And that's, for us, usually the end of the story with Poland, but not quite. We're a stubborn people, and Jews stayed in Poland after the war. Why did Jews stay in Poland? We're a stubborn people. There are all kinds of complicated reasons, family reasons, people had sick parents, people were true believers in communism. Hard to believe considering the way that turned out, but that was the case. And there was still, Jewish life limped on after World War II in Poland. Again, ups and downs. It wasn't easy to be Jewish in Poland, but it wasn't in communist Poland, but it wasn't easy to be anybody in Poland during communism. And at a certain point in 1968, the Jews had to make a choice. Again, these are the Jews that survived, that stayed in Poland after surviving with their families. They had to make a choice. What was the choice? The choice that we have had to make, unfortunately, many times as a people. To stay in the country that we're living and stop being Jewish, or stop being outwardly Jewish, or to keep being Jewish somewhere else. Now, why 1968? Why is 1968 an important date for us? Well, first of all, 1968 is the year after 1967. What happened in 1967? The Six-Day War. And the Soviet Union, which essentially controlled Poland, not essentially, which controlled Poland at that point, backed the Arab countries. And when Israel won this amazing, miraculous victory, they weren't very happy about it. And they certainly weren't happy about the Jews in the country that they suddenly accused of being disloyal. And they said, if we're people that are in this country that are loyal to Israel, they can get out. Right? Zionism, Zionists, you can leave the country. There was also a split in the Communist Party, without getting too much into it. One, again, something that always happens to us in history. One side, there was, in the two parts of the Communist Party, one part had more Jews, one side of it had more Jews, so the other side said, aha, those are Jews, those are, people aren't loyal to Poland, and they played that card, and suddenly Poland became a very difficult place to be Jewish, and Jews left. But again, I don't think I need to tell anybody here, I'm guessing, we're a stubborn people, and not all the Jews left Poland. But this time, the Jews who stayed went underground. What does it mean they went underground? They changed their names very often. They stopped telling even their own children that they were Jewish. So you have the last 20 years of communism, in the 70s and 80s until 1989, you really have no Jewish life, almost no Jewish life at all in Poland. And the Jews who were there kept very, very quiet. In 1989, communism ends very quickly, right? It was a shock for us here, and it was also a shock for them there. And suddenly the country wakes up really from a bad dream. World War II was only 6 years, right? 1939 to 1945, but if you think about it, World War II in Poland really lasted 50 years, really from 1939 to 1989. First, the Germans occupied the country, and then the Soviets occupied the country. 1989, the country wakes up, is free for the first time, and takes a look at itself. And one of the huge differences that this country can finally take a look after 50 years and start reading newspapers that can publish what they want, and start to, the history books start to be written about the truth, whatever that means, is one of the big differences is that there are no Jews. This minority that had lived there for 1,000 years, good times and bad times, was gone. Now everybody knew what happened during the Holocaust, and everybody understood what happened during communism, but they couldn't talk about it. There was no dialogue, there was no healing, because it wasn't convenient for the Soviet Union to allow anybody to focus too much on the particular Jewish suffering, because how can you allow people to focus on the Jewish suffering? How can you justify your own anti-Semitism? So 1989, Poles are very interested in finding out who they are as a free people, and they need to understand what happened to the Jews. And they want to continue this dialogue with the Jews that had been going on since the 10th century, but they can't. Why? Because the Jews have either been murdered or kicked out or driven underground. So what happens? The Poles start to compensate for this inability, I think, to have a dialogue, and they start to study everything about Jews, and they start to listen to Jewish music. Klezmer music becomes very popular. Museums start to open. Jewish studies departments at the universities start to open. The Jewish culture festivals are begun, like the one in Krakow, started by two non-Jews at the end of communism, which is the largest Jewish culture festival in the world, is in Krakow, Poland, started by two non-Jews, one of whom is still running it. Now, I had to take a time out for a second and say, as a New Yorker, I'm somewhat offended that surprised, at least surprised, that the largest Jewish festival in the world is not either in Brooklyn or on the Upper West Side. But it's in Krakow, Poland. This is 30 years since the first festival. It has become this amazing, huge festival, still run by one of these two non-Jewish guys who founded it. So something really quite remarkable is starting to go on in terms of this non-Jewish interest in all things Jewish. 1993, Steven Spielberg comes to Krakow and films Schindler's List in Kazimierz, in the Jewish quarter, which those of you who've been there will of course remember is the best preserved Jewish quarter anywhere in Europe. Right? We have 7 renovated pre-war synagogues. The youngest, what year was the synagogue founded?
100 years ago.
100 years?
Yeah, 1960.
A baby. So the youngest synagogue, now that's very old actually, and for America, but
Not this building.
but the congregation. Yeah. But the youngest synagogue in Krakow, 1862. The youngest, the oldest from the 15th century, right? And all of them, you can go from the JCC, which is right in the middle of the Jewish quarter, you can go to all 7 of them and be back in our building in 10-minute walk, right? This amazing concentration of synagogues, of built Jewish heritage. And this neighborhood, Kazimierz, the Jewish quarter, after Spielberg films, it starts to be all renovated, starts to be the sort of Williamsburg. I don't know if Williamsburg is the right thing. I probably need to say Bushwick now, as I think Williamsburg's already a little too mainstream. But it starts to be this kind of cool area, and you start to have these kind of Jewish restaurants, these sort of fake Jewish-y restaurants, maybe, let's say, not Jewish. The joke is you can go and get like kosher-style pork. Well, I don't know if it's a joke, but let's say it's a joke. But anyway, there starts to be this tremendous amount of interest as Poland, almost devoid of Jews, is coming to terms with this very complicated Jewish history. And the New York Times writes an article and talks about a Jewish Renaissance in Poland. Right? Well, yes, but for me personally, and this is my opinion, is that I want my Jewish Renaissance to have Jews. Right? You can have a Jewish Renaissance without Jews, I think very difficult. But what's really happened is that the backdrop has been laid for what's going on now, which is not the Jewish Renaissance, it's a Jewish Renaissance. This is sort of stage 2. And that's kind of where we come in at the JCC. So we are, as I sort of said in the beginning, dedicated to rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow. We're bringing in all these young people who are finding out they're Jewish, and the survivors who we're taking care of, the whole community really focused around our institution and trying to rebuild. Now, how did the JCC come about? It's, I think, a very interesting story of all the JCCs in the world, and there are, you know how many JCCs there are in the world? Take a guess. Yeah, very good guess. Like 1,200 or so JCCs. The US is probably about 250, and then you have all around the world. They're not always called JCCs, but there are about 1,200 or so JCCs around the world. And ours has the most unique creation story. What is our creation story? We were founded by Prince Charles. Right?
That's unbelievable.
Yes, it's unbelievable, and it's very strange. And I think that a lot of what I'm saying is sort of counterintuitive and bizarre, and it'll get even stranger as I talk, but bear with me. So what is the Prince Charles story? What you're saying to yourself, unbelievable. You're thinking, I'm guessing, Prince Charles, what does he have to do with anything Jewish? Why would he found a JCC in Krakow, right?
His grandmother was
A righteous Gentile.
right.
Yes. She's buried in Jerusalem. You're right. Absolutely true. And Prince Charles went for the first time when he went to Shimon Peres's funeral. He visited his grandmother's grave in Jerusalem for the first time. You're right. She was Greek royalty, and a very interesting. She became a nun and saved Jews. Very interesting story. Yes, but that's not the connection. But that's very knowledgeable of you. There's generally Prince Charles's connection was that he was visiting Krakow. It's very random. Prince Charles was visiting Krakow in 2002 on a state visit, and part of his official state visit to Krakow, they brought him to the Jewish quarter to Kazimierz for a very quick meeting with some survivors. And he was moved. They told him their history. They talked about surviving the Holocaust and then outliving communism. And he was very moved, and he said, "What can I do to help you?" And they said, "Your Highness, your Royal Highness, we have all these synagogues. We have a place to pray. What we don't have is a place to be together, like a senior citizen center." Prince Charles said, "I promise I'm going to help you realize your dream." Now, a lot of people make promises like that. Prince Charles actually followed through, to his eternal credit. And he went back to England and he got involved with an organization. He contacted an organization called World Jewish Relief. They used to be called the Central British Fund for German Jewry. They were the organizer of the Kindertransport. And they're kind of like the Joint. Do you guys know what the Joint, the JDC? The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, right? The JDC. So actually, we have with us today, in the back, is Jennifer Singer. Jennifer is from New York and lives here, but she was working with me in Krakow for 2 years. She was a fellow at the JCC. And she's now back in New York and came up and she worked for them. So this organization, the JDC, is the world's sort of largest Jewish humanitarian organization. And World Jewish Relief does a lot of work with the JDC. And what they did is they took a look at Krakow and they realized something quite interesting, that it wasn't only this community of survivors that was starting to trail off, that there were young people that were starting to find out they were Jewish. And they would meet, two people would meet in a pub and they'd say, "What, are we the only Jews? Do you know anybody?" They say, "You know what, this guy had school, I know his father's Jewish, and I worked with this guy, his mother's Jewish," and they would bring them, and 2 became 4, became 6. And the World Jewish Relief tapped into this, and they saw something was going on, and they thought, you know what, instead of only building a center for senior citizens, maybe we'll do something with a broader mandate to try to revive this Jewish community, to give these young people a chance to reconnect to the Jewish world. So they went back to the prince with this idea. They said, instead of a senior citizen center, what if we build a JCC? And Prince Charles, of course, being Prince Charles, said, "What's a JCC?" Because how would Prince Charles know what a JCC is? Then once they explained to him what JCC was, Prince Charles was on board and he gave some money, and with the prince's involvement, they were able to raise the funds. And in 2008, so 10 years ago, we're celebrating our 10th birthday. In 2008, in April, Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, came and spent the day with us and opened the JCC. And I was Prince Charles's host for the whole day, spent the whole day with him. And for a nice Jewish boy from Queens, that was a pretty cool way to spend the day, I have to say. So now the building's been open for 10 years. What's going on in the center? Well, first of all, if you look in the guidebooks, or if you Google it and you say, how many Jews are in Krakow? Usually the guidebooks say there are 100 Jews in Krakow. And at this point in our JCC, we have 680 Jewish members in a city with 100 Jews. So I think it tells us 2 things. One, it tells us that we're doing a pretty good job of reaching out to the Jews in the community. And the second thing it tells us is that all the numbers are complete nonsense, and that nobody has any idea how many Jews there are, because until we opened, people like Maria and people like Marziana that I mentioned in the beginning really had no way to find their way in. So what's happening now are the children and grandchildren of the survivors, the ones who stayed, are finding their way back, are being told in these amazing ways, like I mentioned these stories, or they're finding a box in the attic. We've had somebody finds a box in the attic with photos of people, pre-war photos, black and white photos with people with long beards. They do a little research. They realize there weren't many Amish in Poland in 1939, and that maybe something else is going on, and make their way into our center. So people are coming in almost every day, and the community is being reborn. So in terms of what's going on actually in the building, our center is, I think, if you took it, it's like a JCC. It's called JCC, but I think it's a combination of JCC, Hillel, synagogue, visitor center, and Federation and Jewish Family Services. These are sort of all the roles that we're wearing. So in terms of what our building looks like, we have a preschool. We just opened a preschool, which is the first Jewish school to open in Krakow in 70 years. We have a nursery school. We have a Sunday school. We have, I mentioned Hillel, so we had a student club going on for a few years called Gimel. Why is it called Gimel? They started during Hanukkah, but not only, because they are the third generation after the Holocaust, so they called themselves Gimel. And now we are the youngest Hillel in the world, because we just in June came under the auspices of Hillel International, which has been fantastic for us. We have a senior club, which is, if you'll remember, was the original impetus of the community center. We have 70 Holocaust survivors that are members of our JCC, that are there 6 days a week till 8:30 at night. They're really there 7 days a week, but they're only officially 6 days a week there, and that means we have physical rehabilitation for them, social services, welfare program, arts and crafts, yoga, film night, language class. Really, the seniors have a very, very rich program, and nothing is more important. We talk all the time about rebuilding, but there's absolutely nothing more important to our mission and nothing more important to us in terms of who we are as an institution than taking care of these 70 Holocaust survivors. We also have Shabbat dinners. Every week we do a Shabbat dinner. That's 50, 60, 70 local people plus up to a few hundred from around the world during the Jewish Culture Festival. Last year we did the dinner outside the building. We opened it up to anybody. We had 630 people for Shabbat dinner, which is the largest Shabbat dinner in at least since the war. We have 8 different levels of Hebrew. We have Arabic class. We have Yiddish class. We have a genealogist on staff to help people find their Jewish roots, whether local people that are finding out that they're Jewish, they have an inkling that maybe something's going on, so we have a genealogist that helps them, or visitors who come from around the world, that we put them in touch to help connect them to find out about their background in Poland. We have a choir. We publish a newspaper. We have yoga. We have Israeli dance. And we are also, the rabbi has his conversion classes and teaches classes at the JCC. That's sort of the bit of the synagogue role that we have. We are also the visitor center in Krakow, the Jewish Visitor Center. 125,000 visitors came through our building in 2017, which is phenomenal. Also, of course, the synagogue, which has become a really good friend and strong supporter of what we're doing at the JCC based on the initial visit from 2014. And now many synagogues and federations come to Poland and come to our center. Why does this matter? Why is this important? Like, why, small community, 100, there are generally, your synagogue has more members probably at this point than there are Jews in Krakow. Well, we think there are a lot more than there really are, but we'll see. Why does this matter? I think that there are 3 reasons why this is so important. One is there are lost Jews. To me, being Jewish means being part of a family. And these are our lost family members that are cut off from the Jewish people, cut off from their identity because of the twin horrors of the Holocaust and then 50 years of communism. And I think we have an amazing opportunity now to reach out and to bring these people back in. And to me, they're victims of the Holocaust. They're not victims of the Holocaust that were murdered. They're secondary victims of the Holocaust that were cut off from who they are. And we have an opportunity now, because they're finding out that they're Jewish, because we have a very positive environment still in Poland, where they can reconnect and rejoin the Jewish people, because we have an opportunity. I think in Judaism there's very, very little daylight between opportunity and responsibility. Because we have the opportunity to do it, I think we have the responsibility to do it. And that's a basic thing, to bring these people back into the fold. The second reason is that this is Poland. This is the place where the Holocaust happened. The JCC is an hour's drive from Auschwitz. It's 50 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles from Auschwitz. And if we look at the map of Europe today, it's not a very easy place to be Jewish. Country by country, it's a darkening time for the Jews. Not only France and maybe Belgium that we've heard about, but the Scandinavian countries, which are sort of held up as a paragon of liberal values, are becoming increasingly unsafe to be Jewish. I think the chief rabbi of Norway, said, put on a kippah when you walk into the synagogue, take off the kippah when you walk out, but don't walk around with the kippah. So against this backdrop of the Holocaust, the worst tragedy that has befallen our people ever, or in at least a very long time, and a darkening Europe, the place where the Holocaust happened, the epicenter of the Holocaust has become once again a place of Jewish life. And what does it say about us as a Jewish people? The strength and resilience of the Jewish people, that Jewish life can thrive not only in Greenwich, Connecticut, and Forest Hills, and in Atlanta, and in Buenos Aires, and Israel, but Jewish life can thrive in the place where Jewish life was almost completely extinguished. I think it really speaks volumes about who we are as a people, and I think that that makes it all the more important what we're doing today in Krakow. And that's the second reason. And the third reason is Poland is our homeland. Our homeland is Israel, where we came from 2,000 years ago, went into exile, but the place where we became who we are, the way that we eat and the way that we pray and the way that we get married. I'm very thinking about that because I got married recently to a young woman who grew up without knowing she was Jewish, found out she was Jewish, and we met at the JCC and had the chuppah, got married at the JCC. It's a very nice story. I'm very on message as a director, even my wife, of course, from the JCC. But this is the place where we became who we are as a people. And the idea that we only define it by the Holocaust is, I think, very unhealthy for us. Now, of course, it's hard not to only see the Holocaust, and to be able to, the challenge that we really have, whether as Jews visiting Poland or thinking about Poland, is how to see past the Holocaust. Not to not learn about the Holocaust, not to not study the Holocaust, not to not learn the message of the Holocaust to make sure it doesn't happen again to us or to anyone else, but to be able to understand that that's not who we are as a people. But the idea that the place that we come from is only defined by the Holocaust is, I think, cutting ourselves off from our own identity. 75% of North American Jews come from Poland, trace their heritage to Poland. How many of you here have Polish roots? It's exactly 75%. That's amazing. That always works out. No, but this is really the place that we come from, and we're disconnected from it. And if you think about it, if you're a Sephardic Jew, right, you're cut off from your heritage. You can't go jump on a plane next week and go to Aleppo and Baghdad and Alexandria and connect to these great centers of Sephardic life, right? But Poland is a place that we still have to safeguard that. We have to make sure not to be cut off. And we've allowed ourselves to be cut off. And there's great logic to it. Obviously, the Holocaust is something so huge that we don't quite understand how to put it into any context, and maybe we can't really put it into context. But I think it behooves us to try to see past the Holocaust to the Jewish life that was there before, and also to the Jewish life that's thriving there now. I think we owe it to the survivors who stayed in Poland. I think we owe it to the young people who are finding out they're Jewish today. And I think that really for us, for ourselves, it's not healthy for us to be disconnected from the place where so many of us trace our roots to. I would say that those of you who've been to Poland, it would be great for you to come back. And if you haven't been, then I would encourage you to visit. And like many people, and myself included, you come to Poland saying Kaddish, and you leave saying Shechianu. I want to just very, very quickly tell you about something we do called Ride for the Living, which I think is absolutely the coolest thing that we do. What is Ride for the Living? Ride for the Living is a one-day bicycle ride from Auschwitz to JCC Krakow, 55 miles. Heard of March of the Living? So it's sort of our take on March of the Living, except it's a little more focused on the living. Although March of the Living now, they used to come to Poland and not really connect to us or to Jewish life, and now they do a much, much better job. March of the Living, we work very closely with them. But the original name came from sort of the relationship a little bit from March of the Living. So what is Ride for the Living? So in 2014, a Jewish guy from London met a Polish woman and fell in love and decided to move to Poland. And instead of doing what sane people do, which is get on an airplane, he decided to ride his bicycle from London to Poland. Okay? He's a bit of a history buff, so he rode went to sites connected to the Holocaust and connected to World War II, and he filmed it all with his GoPro, and he blogged about it, and he kind of raised awareness about the Holocaust. And then he finished. It took him about 3 weeks. I think it was about 1,350 miles, and he finished in Auschwitz. And then he came to Krakow, and he came to the JCC, and he found something he wasn't expecting to find in Poland, which is Jewish life and a Jewish community kind of coming back from the ashes, really. And we became friends, and we're sitting around one day. And we said, listen, Robert, it's wonderful what you've done. You rode your bike all this way. You raised awareness about the Holocaust, but you finished in Auschwitz. And I don't think Auschwitz is a place that you finish if you have a choice not to finish in Auschwitz. So why don't we do your ride together? Why don't we finish the ride together? We'll go from Auschwitz to the JCC, from a place of darkness to a place of light, from a place of tragedy to a place of hope, and we'll call it Ride for the Living. Robert said, good idea. So we did it in 2014. We had 15 participants, and we did it as a fundraiser, and we were able to raise money to bring a group of 30 Holocaust survivors, hidden children, to Israel. So these were all people who were kids at the time, who were saved by non-Jews, and we were able to do a mission, 30 of them to Israel. I was on the mission. It was phenomenal. We went to Yad Vashem. They all paid honor to the non-Jews who saved them. It was very emotional, an amazing, amazing trip. And we said, wow, we're onto something with this ride. Let's do it again. So we decided to do it again in 2015. We had 85 participants, and right before the ride, maybe a month or so before the ride, we get a phone call from Canada. The guy's name is Marcel from Montreal, and he says, hello, my name is Marcel. I'm from Montreal. I'd like to come on the ride. And we said, great, wow, he's from Canada. He's coming on the ride. We're expanding. And then he says, oh, and I was born in Krakow. We go, really? You're born in Krakow? Okay, that's interesting. And he goes, and I'm 80 years old. And I'm an Auschwitz survivor. And he tells us his story that when he was 10 years old, on January 27th, 1945, he was liberated, and he, along with a few of the other children who were in terrible, terrible shape, as you would imagine, walked from Auschwitz to Krakow. He was looking for his family. His family was all murdered, except for his mom. He reunited with his mother. They lived in Poland for a few years, where he became a cyclist. And then they moved to Israel. And from Israel, he moved to Montreal. And now at 80, he's an avid cyclist. Of course, he spends his winters, as all the Montreal cyclist Jews do, in Boca, where he's a very active member of the Boca Senior Cycling Club. And can he come on the ride? So we're like, Marcel, you had us at Canada. Can you come on the ride? This is like... So Marcel comes on the ride in 2015. He brings his son and his 2 granddaughters who live in Israel. Instead of looking for his murdered family, he's riding alongside his family that he created, along with the reborn Jewish community of Krakow and cyclists from all over the world. And we rode along the same path that he walked when he was liberated as a 10-year-old. Unbelievable. So we decided, we did it. We're like, okay, now this has got to be an annual thing. So we did it again the next year. We did it again this past year. It was the 4th year we did it. We had 160 participants. Marcel came and did it again with us. We had the U.S. ambassador to Poland. We had the chief rabbi of Poland. We had an Israeli cycling champion. We had an Olympic cyclist. And we had a guy named Joachim Frank. It was a very interesting story. And during the ride, we got to know Joachim. He is not Jewish. He was born in Germany, in Berlin, during the war. His family were Nazis. And at a young age, he realized after the war, his father was killed during the war. His mother survived and was still kind of a Nazi. He realized that that was terrible and decided to go study in the United States, where he married a Jewish woman. He became a chemist, and he is a professor at Columbia University. And he just won the 2017 Nobel Prize in chemistry. And he was on, and so we were reading the news one day and looking online, and we're like, wait a minute, we know him, when they announced they're coming. So the bicycle ride. So this is an amazing, amazing ride. We're doing it again this year. There would be hundreds of people coming. We do satellite rides as well, all around different JCCs and federations all around the U.S. in order to organize sort of their spin class to coincide with the ride. The ride is during the Jewish Culture Festival. So you can come to the bicycle ride. We go to Auschwitz the first day, and then Friday we ride, finish the ride Friday afternoon, and then Shabbat dinner. We'll have about 700 people for Shabbat dinner after the bicycle ride. And then Saturday is the final, Saturday night is the final concert of the Jewish Culture Festival. It's about 20,000 people, open air concert, this amazing thing. And then Sunday, the final day, we'll have our birthday party. So it's a very cool time. If you haven't come to Krakow, then this would be an exceptionally cool time to come and do the bicycle ride. Even if you're not a cyclist, we have a program for non-cyclists. It's a great time to come, and there's a whole really amazing weekend to be there.
I think the message of the ride is from the devastating historical experience of the Holocaust to the hope of the JCC, to the Jewish Community Center that's helping Jewish life rebuild here in Poland.
We never really thought that there could be life in Poland again. And when we saw the excitement of people seeing the JCC and the programs, we said we need to be a part of this. Most of us come from here, and here we can do something about it 77 years later.
It's really important to honor the past and remember and reflect on the loss and the horror of what happened at Auschwitz, but it's also important to continue the journey toward life.
Rain, give me snow, I don't care. We're gonna keep coming and we're gonna keep doing it every year.
Big smile, big smile. The celebration of doing this ride is really something that you'll never forget in your life.
So the question, are there other Jewish communities where this sort of revival is going on? Warsaw and Lublin and stuff. Warsaw, absolutely. Warsaw is the capital and the biggest city in Poland, so there's much sort of very developed Jewish life relative to to Poland in Warsaw. Lublin, not really. The medical school was given back sort of to the community. The community is attached to the Warsaw community. There's not really much Jewish life in Lublin. I think that in Krakow, in Warsaw, and in Wrocław. Wrocław is Breslau. Used to be a part of Germany. It was given to Poland after World War II when the border shifted. Those are the three main communities. And then Łódź also has some Jewish life, but certainly in smaller towns and stuff, not really very much. There might be some Jews there, but there's not really much young people. There's also a large migration to the cities. So that's just sort of the way, people in the small towns, young people, Jewish and non-Jewish, are moving to the bigger cities. Is the Polish government encouraging Jews to come back? Not really. The Polish government has been, this government now for the last couple of years is a little more complicated. That's sort of its own issue. But generally, the government has been pretty much a partner for Jewish life. I don't know that they're necessarily encouraging people to move back, but certainly working with us, has worked with us to help develop Jewish life. Not necessarily financially, they don't really give us much money, but the environment that's in Poland is still a pretty good environment. This government is a little more complicated though, yeah. as is ours. So these young people that are finding out they're Jewish, do they marry other Jews or do they intermarry? So actually we did a bit of a study on it and kind of a survey in our community. So it's actually, while intermarriage is kind of lessening in Krakow, because you had almost complete intermarriage. Why? Because the Jews who stayed after 1968, when there was this official round of anti-Semitism and the Jews were kicked out, the ones who stayed because they were married to somebody not Jewish. Right? If there were two Jews in the couple, they generally left because they had no way, there was nothing to really hold them there. So now we do find absolutely that young people are meeting at the JCC and getting married. I think we've had 6 or 7 couples that met at the JCC and got married, myself included, met my wife there. So yeah, so it's happening. But you know, we see ourselves as an incredibly inclusive community. For us, if you're an intermarried couple, you're a full member of the JCC. Very often we have couples where, let's say, the husband is Jewish and doesn't come to the JCC, and the wife is not Jewish and she's at the JCC every day. So that's, for us, it's not an issue. We try to be absolutely as inclusive as possible. No, although I did meet with Prince Charles in January, and I invited him to come for our 10th birthday, which is the celebration this year. The community asked me, especially the Hillel students, asked me that to invite Prince Harry as opposed to Prince Charles, but I felt I had to invite Prince Charles since he was the founder. So no, we don't necessarily get any financial support from him anymore. We are fully supported by overseas donations, so that's 95% of our budget comes from overseas individuals and foundations, generally from the U.S. So we started a 501c3 here in the U.S. called Friends of JCC Krakow, to be able to, so Americans can make tax-deductible donations. So yeah, not Prince Charles anymore. So I travel around a lot, and it's a unique model, really, that we're a Jewish community center in Europe that's essentially taking care of the entire community, and yet dependent on overseas donations for our funding. So it's a challenge. Yes, so they've recently started to get involved a little bit. They help us since we opened the preschool. We never had any security in the building at all. The building is wide open, gate wide open, and since the preschool opened in September, we have a security guard. So we were like unique pretty much in the Jewish world for 9.5 years, not having any security whatsoever. And we got a security guard recently, and the Lauder Foundation helps us with that. So Mr. Lauder has kind of moved away, and the foundation has moved away a little bit from Poland, and I've been meeting with him pretty regularly in the last year and a half, and he's starting to get, I think, a little more interested because of this revival going on. There are summer camps is the question. There are summer camps. We don't run them. The JDC does a great job and runs summer camps in Poland, and there's a very, very good summer camp in Hungary called Sarvas, which our kids go to, and sometimes our madrichim work there as counselors as well. I have a little bit of a different take. I mean, of course, to me, Holocaust denial is the most obscene thing that can be. It's denying fact. We live in a complicated political environment where it seems like facts. It's not everybody's entitled to his own opinion. Not everybody's not entitled to their own facts. My concern with Holocaust denial is maybe a little bit of a different take. I'm not as worried about Holocaust denial, although it of course offends me, and especially as somebody who's living in a post-Holocaust community and rebuilding next to Auschwitz, you would imagine how it pains me. But I'm very concerned that we as a people don't put too much of our energy in trying to fight against that. In other words, the role of the Holocaust in our identity is something that we have to be very, very mindful of. And of course, we have to do everything to make sure that we never forget the Holocaust, and that, again, I said it before, it never happens to us or anyone else again. That being said, we have to be very, very careful not to base our identity on the Holocaust. I think what connects us in this room is maybe a small part of it is the tragedy that we suffered in the Holocaust and other tragedies, but I think what connects us is what we stand for, what we've accomplished in the world, the way that we as a people still seek to be a light unto the world. And I sort of sometimes think that we focus so much on, can focus a lot on Holocaust denial, and that it's sort of giving credence sometimes to the deniers. That being said, you know, I know Deborah Lipstadt, who's of course fought the amazing, you know, case against David Irving. She's been to the JCC. She's somebody that I greatly admire, and think is you know, is a real hero to the Jewish people. But you know, I don't know. You know, in Poland, for all the problems, and you know, we don't really have Holocaust denial because the Holocaust really happened there. So you know, people can say they don't like the Jews, but they're not going to say the Holocaust denial. But I think sometimes we can expend, you know, you have to be careful not to expend too much energy focusing on the Holocaust, because then that sort of becomes the center, the core of who we are as a people. And the core, you know, we never should let others define who we are. We shouldn't be defined by tragedy. And when people come to the JCC, and very often they've been to Auschwitz that morning and they're having a Shabbat dinner at the JCC, and I say, who you are is not where you were this morning. Who you are is not what they did to us. Who we are as a Jewish people is not defined by tragedy, it's defined by our response to tragedy. And I think that that's an important, we're at a very interesting point as in the next 5, 10, 15 years, there really won't be many survivors at all among us. And how we somehow come to terms with the Holocaust is, I think, a very important thing. And somehow, and it's difficult to do, and I don't necessarily have an answer, but somehow we need to put it in some sort of context, and we need to not define ourselves really by the Holocaust, because it's not healthy for us. And the deniers are terrible, and we should, you know, prosecute them, but we should not maybe waste all our energy on it. There is anti-Semitism in Poland. I think there's not a huge amount of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism we sometimes think is a binary, something it is, it isn't, the country is or it isn't a person, but I think anti-Semitism is a very big category, and in Poland we don't have the kind which is necessarily the most dangerous, virulent kind, which is there's no threat, so you can walk down the street in a kippah and nobody's really bothering you. Sometimes there are old stereotypes, the Jews control the world, and the Jews have all this influence and have all this money, but I think that Poland is a place where anti-Semitism is not increasing. I think in Europe it's generally getting more difficult to be Jewish, and Poland, despite the bumps of the last year or two, has been a place where it's been getting increasingly easy to be Jewish. At the JCC, which is a small JCC, right, we're 10,000 square feet, it's a very, not an American, big giant JCC, we have 55 non-Jewish volunteers. And I think that one of the things that speaks most eloquently and loudly about who we are as an institution and what Poland looks like really today is the fact that there are 55 non-Jewish young people who are spending their time. When you walk in our building in the reception, there's a non-Jewish volunteer. The Shabbat dinner, it's 5, 10, 15 people sometimes taking and bringing the food and helping with the dinner are all Polish non-Jews, young people who feel the country lost something when it lost its Jews, and they have an opportunity not only to learn about this almost vanished people, but they have an opportunity to work hand in hand with the Jewish community to rebuild. And I think that that's something, I don't know of many Jewish institutions of any size that have that many non-Jewish volunteers, and it really speaks a little bit about our institution, but maybe more about what Poland looks like today. Generally, official religious life in Krakow is Orthodox, so the synagogues are run, as much as there are services in the synagogues, they're Orthodox services. We are now in the process of starting a new progressive community, which is something very exciting, just because people need the choice that we're used to here in the United States, and nothing against the Orthodox or anyone else, but I think we would certainly realize, and certainly speaking where we are today, we understand the value of people being able to express themselves religiously as they like. And the model in Europe is very often a sort of a top-down. They decide that the official branch of Judaism is Orthodox, and everybody either fits or doesn't fit. And that's a model that we in the United States understand is not a great model, and that's why we have religious pluralism here within the Jewish world, and we're working to do that. So we're started to look for a rabbi. We're just registered our new progressive congregation in Krakow, so it's very exciting for us. The question is, what brought me to Poland? So it's a good question. So I've been living there since 2001. I'm originally, as I said, from New York City. I grew up Orthodox. For me, at a very young age, I realized that wasn't a good fit for me. My father, to this day, still wishes I was more religious. I was about to start law school when I realized maybe not for me, so I deferred law school for a year. I went to Israel because it was warmer in Israel than it was in New York. I found my way to a kibbutz in the Negev near Eilat, and I fell in love with Israel and with the kibbutz. I decided to make aliyah, and I was living there for a while as a soldier, and then after the army deciding, should I stay or should I go? And I met a Polish woman, not Jewish, and I decided to move with her to Łódź. She was from Łódź, from Lodz, and I had never visited Poland, had been there at all, and I just picked up and moved there. And after a year living in Łódź, I got a job in Krakow at the university, at the Jagiellonian University. And and then that was, we taught there for 6 years, and then 10 years ago, they were building the JCC, and I was the only one who knew what the initials stood for, and I got the job, so. But it has a happy ending because, as I said, I didn't work out with her, with the woman that I met in Israel. We broke up, and I just fell in love with Krakow, and I stayed, and then met my wife at the JCC. Kibbutz Yotvata. So if you've been to Israel, the chocolate milk. It's famous for the chocolate milk. And driving on the way to Eilat, and you stop and get the chocolate milk. It's a very nice kibbutz. A little bit of different weather than they have in Krakow. I was the lifeguard on the kibbutz, so now I'm paying for my sins. That's why I'm studying in Krakow now, freezing all the time.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Great, thank you guys very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.